excited to have you. Okay, and got the notification about the meeting being live streamed. Great. So yeah, Lindsay, welcome. Let's just do a quick round of introductions and I'll cycle through and then we'll go into the co-chair election. So again, I'm Stephanie Page, Deputy Director. Let's go next to Corey and then to Bruce.
Good morning, Corey Owens. I'm the Assistant for Partnership with USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bruce Buckmaster. I'm a public at large member of the board from Astoria.
Great. Next, we'll do Gary and then Lisa.
Morning, everybody. I'm Gary Marshall. I'm public at large OWEB board member from Harney County.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Sharplow Hansen, Executive Director of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
Great. Next, we'll do Eric Hartstein and then Dan Brown.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Eric Hartstein, OWEB staff, board, and legislative policy coordinator.
And my name is Dan Brown. I work for the Environmental Protection Agency, and I'm on the board as an ex officio representative from EPA.
Next, we'll do Lindsay and then Kelly.
Good morning, everybody. Lindsay McClary, newly appointed board member, public at large member. I work for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and I live in West Salem.
Morning, everyone. Kelly Coates, tribal representative on the OWEB board, and I work for the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians.
Great. Next, we'll do Jamie and then Jesse.
Hi, Jamie McLeod Skinner. I'm an at-large board member on OWEB and live in Central Oregon.
Good morning, Jesse Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator at OWEB.
Thanks, Jesse. Okay, next we'll do Brenda and then Audrey.
Brenda McComb, I represent the Oregon Board of Forestry on OWEB.
Good morning, Audrey Hatch on OWEB staff. I am the Conservation Outcomes Coordinator.
Great, thanks, Audrey. And then we've got a member of the public, Kaylin Barter, here this morning. And then April Mack is running the meeting for us. So I don't know if April's got the meeting sound on or is just hosting, but just wanted to note that both of those folks are here as well for the record. So again, welcome. We'll move in now to talking about the election of a chair or co-chair. And I spoke with both Bruce and Jamie a couple of weeks ago because they chaired the two committees that merged to form this committee. They've both indicated that they're willing to continue serving as chair or co-chair and that they're also flexible if other folks are interested. And so Bruce or Jamie, anything else you would like to say before we move forward with nominations and election?
If we're ready for that, I'll make that motion to for the election of Bruce and Jamie to co-chair positions.
I'll second Gary's motion.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. I don't know if I've ever facilitated a vote via Zoom before, so I'm just gonna watch for any objections. I'm gonna scroll through folks' photos and see if anybody has objections, and then we'll consider it adopted if I don't see any. All right, I'm scrolling back through. Not seeing any objections, so we have successfully elected Bruce and Jamie as your new co-chairs. Great, so Bruce and Jamie will all continue to facilitate this meeting and then follow up with you afterwards regarding the meetings going forward. So the next agenda item, yes, and thank you both for being willing to continue serving. So next item is what we would like to include as a standing item. And that's going to be just an ongoing discussion of intersectionality between the topics in this committee and particularly the DEI committee. And then also a quick discussion about priority topics that we'll be discussing in this committee meeting going forward. So I think obviously the climate resolution, the listening sessions and engagement around the resolution, and then future rulemaking around climate criteria will be an ongoing topic of discussion and update, but wanted to gather additional feedback from the committee members on other topics you would like covered. Are there water topics of particular interest in addition to the climate topics that we'll be discussing on an ongoing basis? And I'll ask folks to raise your hand if you've got a comment, just so that I can call on folks and avoid folks speaking over each other. Oh, Kelly. Oh, and you're on mute, Kelly. Sorry.
Thought I unmuted myself. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, I think something that would be good for this group to discuss moving forward is just there's a lot of stuff going on with water right now we're all aware of at the state level. And so I think maybe some updates on like the regional water planning team, what's going on with the 100-year water vision, and then the strategy as well.
Great. Jamie.
Yeah, really appreciate that comment, Kelly. Strongly agree. Also, just want to say I appreciate having DEI and that intersectionality as a standing item. I think it's really important in past conversations on both water and climate committees. We've had those conversations and there's a lot of tie-ins. So I think it's a great opportunity to make sure we're not missing things and missing opportunities to engage DEI into the how we do our work. And then also on that point, for members of the public who are interested or for others, we are now, as we're looking at going into rulemaking action the board took back in January, it's a little bit down the line, but rulemaking around our climate resolution to make sure that if there are ideas or suggestions on how we can better incorporate outreach to all Oregonians, just really want to warmly embrace that, encourage folks either to weigh in on committees or to reach out directly to staff. And Stephanie, who would be the key contact for people to reach out, for members of the public to reach out to?
Sure. They can reach out to Jesse, Jesse Kirshner, who's on one of the 3 folks staffing this committee.
Excellent, thank you. And then Jesse, what's the best way for folks to contact you just to get that out in the public?
Oh, probably via email. So my email is just jessie.kirshner@oweb.oregon.gov.
Thanks.
Stephanie, I'm jumping in without my hand raised only because I'm on a computer rather than my iPad and I cannot find their hand raise function.
Hey, no problem.
Can somebody tell me where that is? And then I'll be quiet for a minute.
It should be in the reactions on if you can see the reactions button.
Oh, there it is. Okay,
yeah.
I got it. Okay.
And I'm glad you spoke up because we did introductions earlier and I don't want to skip you. So would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just having all kinds of technical problems this morning. It took me a while to find the link and I wasn't supposed to be here, but the Water Resources Commission meeting start is at noon today, which is very unusual. So I was able to come to both meetings. My name is Meg Reeves. I'm the Water Resources Commission representative on OWEB. So hello, everybody. Regarding the comment that was just made, I could at some point, if people are interested, update at least on the regional water table because I'm part of the kind of leadership team for that effort. So let me know if that would be helpful.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Meg.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, oh, Bruce.
Thanks, Stephanie. One of the things I'd like to talk about is how we want to use our website, the OWEB website. the Climate Committee and Water Committee produced a lot of great information. We've got a good start with some fine information on the webpage. Most of the natural resource agencies in Oregon have a climate tab, or climate, in our case, would be a climate water tab. But throughout the last couple years, a great deal of information has been gathered from various members of the committee that might help our partners going forward. So maybe at some point, if somebody has something, that we need to have a mechanism that's agreeable to staff, that we can say, this is something that we think will help and we'd like to see it on the website. So I don't know if that you want to do that as well, however you'd like to do that. I think it's something that can help us.
Great. And yeah, I think we'll be interested in folks' feedback too, as we do the listening sessions and gather more information about what sort of resources folks need. Maybe that's something that Jesse and Audrey will cover in part as when they talk about the responses to the application. So, but yeah, what I hear you saying, Bruce, is having a website with resources for grantees that will help provide support on climate related issues. Is that right?
Yes. Let me give a quick example. I know that Brenda McComb and myself were two people who were able to sit in on a webinar that was done by the Forest or Fish and Wildlife, and it has just been posted. And maybe Brenda can talk about it, but I thought the first half hour of that webinar, with the visuals they had and the subject matter they covered, was the best half hour overview of everything that OWEB's Climate Committee and OWEB has committed to do in the resolution. It talked about partnerships, gave examples, it talked about nature-based solutions. It felt like it was designed for us. And I just got it was just posted this morning, and I've got the website that I'll share with everybody now, but maybe Brenda can say something about it.
Oh yeah, I think you covered it, Bruce. It's actually a 13-part webinar series offered over the next year by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service collaboratively with NIAX, which is the climate change group out of the Forest Service. And the first kickoff webinar was the one that Bruce described. And all of those webinars will be recorded and available. And just to expand maybe on your comments, Stephanie, I think these resources, there are resources that would be beneficial not only to the people writing proposals, but also to board members and to staff. And so if you have a web page with a climate water tab, as Bruce suggested, then you could post these links, especially ones that might be more helpful to the project preparers, to staff, to the board members, or to everybody. I think you can parse it out in various ways. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you, Bruce.
Great. Any other feedback? All right, on topics. Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands raised. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody for your input, and we're going to move on now to an update on the climate resolution outreach, and Jesse and Eric will be providing that. And just wanted to say that I'm really excited about the work that they're doing. Together, we've met with several other state agencies to get advice from them on really thoughtful and intentional engagement. So we've spent a lot of time reaching out to various folks in the governor's office, at other state agencies, just to learn from some of the lessons that they've already learned with some really creative engagement strategies that they're using. So I think I've gotten some really good advice that'll inform how we do the engagement. We also are working with our contractor who's doing the DEI trainings, who you all have met, just to get some advice on what's the best way that is workable for the organizations that we want to reach, to engage with them. So, and then we've been thinking about additional groups. I think there was an excellent suggestion in the last DEI committee about picking three new groups to broaden our outreach and to help amplify information about the work that we're doing. And so that is a suggestion that we followed through on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric and Jesse, and then I'll just kind of add in at the end of their remarks anything else. So go ahead, Eric and Jesse.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. So yeah, OWEB staff have initiated some public outreach for the climate resolution adopted by the board at the January meeting. This week, Jesse and I kind of kicked things off on the public outreach side with a webinar through the Oregon Conservation Partnership, where we provided a little background on the resolution, OWEB rulemaking processes, and letting the attendees know how they can provide feedback to OWEB on the climate resolution. So some of that feedback can be through 6 public virtual listening sessions that we will have scheduled for this April and May, where we're going to be soliciting feedback from folks on both the challenges and opportunities that they see with the climate resolution. These listening sessions will be externally facilitated, and we've scheduled them for morning, afternoon, and evening sessions in order to try to get as much public participation as possible. So the announcement for this will be sent through our GovDelivery email notification and then posted on our website in order to get attendance from audiences like our traditional grant applicants and grantees, review team members, and project implementers, and the general public. And we also will encourage OWEB board members and probably this committee membership in particular to attend at least one of the sessions in order to hear some of the input that stakeholders are providing. So we'll be sending this out via GovDelivery, but just so you have it, the listening sessions will be April 14th from 2 to 4 p.m., April 20th from 11 to 1, May 3rd, 6 to 8 p.m., May 11th from 5 to 7 p.m., May 17th, 1 to 3 p.m., and May 19th, 9 to 11 a.m. And at the same time, we have developed a short survey for those that either cannot attend one of the listening sessions or don't feel comfortable providing feedback in a public forum. And the survey is asking many of the same questions around challenges and opportunities that folks see with the climate resolution. And we'll be including a link to the survey with the GovDelivery notification, which will also be accessible on OWEB's website. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Jesse to describe some of the other outreach we've done or are planning on doing related to the climate resolution.
Thanks, Eric. Jamie, I saw that you had your hand raised very briefly. Do you want to hold until?
Yeah, I think you may answer some of my questions, so go ahead.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Eric. This is Jesse Kirshner again with OWEB. So some other things that we are also doing as part of this public engagement process, we have been working to identify a time to have a tribal focus group listening session. So a letter went out to all tribes to notify them about this opportunity, and then we've done a doodle poll to figure out best time and day to do that. So we will be having a tribal focus group listening session that's looking like it's going to be in that early May kind of time frame is the current doodle poll input. Although tribes are invited to participate in the public listening sessions as well. So there'll be multiple avenues in which they can participate and provide feedback. We also are offering one-on-one engagements and conversations with OWEB staff. So if people, again, just feel more comfortable having a conversation with someone that they know at OWEB, we are offering that as another means of engagement on this. And as Stephanie mentioned, we've been working with our DEI consultant, Eco Northwest. And what we're really trying to do is to make strategic use of our non-traditional partners' time. We don't want to be asking them to participate in multiple listening sessions or multiple groups. And so Eco Northwest already has planned interviews with a number of these non-traditional partners. So we are going to give them some of the climate-related questions that we're talking about at the public listening sessions to have them ask in their interviews. So that's going to be part of those that engagement with non-traditional partners. We've also been working with OWEB's regional program representatives, or RPRs, to think about how to get the word out to implementers and contractors, and through their grantees, and really trying to target some of those voices that we maybe haven't necessarily heard from in the past with those on the ground implementers and contractors. And let's see, I have a lot of things on my list, so I want to make sure that I'm hitting them all. And we, as Stephanie also mentioned, we've been working a lot with other state agencies to get a sense of how others have done this kind of stakeholder engagement, particularly around climate. We've gotten some great input, and some important points have come up just about making sure that, we can't necessarily reach out to a group or organization if they've never heard of us or don't know someone here. They're not necessarily going to respond. So we need to be really strategic about how we do that and hope to get people actually to respond to us. We've also met with the governor's office to talk about existing advisory groups that are there related to DEI and how we can engage with them in the most effective manner. And our plan is essentially to take all of this information from the public listening sessions, the survey input that we'll be sharing, that Audrey and I will share later, from the responses to the climate questions, and assemble that into a summary report that we'll share with the board, likely in that July meeting and prior to that meeting. And then I think I'll turn it over to Stephanie right now if there's any other points that she wanted to mention, just in terms of other things that we've talked about. Oh, you're muted. Stephanie.
Yep. Sorry. Yep. You did a great job, Jesse and Eric. Thank you. Yeah, I think as they said, we've picked some additional ag groups too, just to do some focused outreach with kind of a diverse portfolio of ag groups, following on the pick 3 additional organization suggestion that came up a couple of weeks ago. And then, yeah, as Jesse mentioned, I think just making sure that we reach out to groups who, in a way where they recognize the person reaching out to them, that we've heard that that's very important from the agencies and organizations that we've talked to for advice, and just really emphasizing the connections between the work that the agency does and what a particular group cares about. And that just requires some thought and research into what each group's priorities are. So I'm excited about the amount of work that has gone on to launch onto this effort. Really appreciate the work that our staff have done, and we're happy to take any questions or feedback.
Stephanie, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is Gary Marshall. I was just wondering, when you outreach to these ag groups, are you talking, is the topic specifically on climate, or is it a water climate combo? And if so, what are you hearing?
Let's see, Gary, you broke up a little bit, but I think you were asking what are we hearing? Is that right? Okay, so I would say yes, the outreach is going to include the climate resolution, but it will be broader as well. And I think then in a couple more agenda items, you'll hear a legislative update about the 2021 session. There's certainly some resources that we received, the 2022 short session. There's some resources that we received that we want to be conducting outreach about. I think some of the groups are not fundamentally familiar with what the agency does. And so I think starting from that place and leveraging some existing relationships that we have is going to be really important. So, so far, with the groups that we've talked to, I would say just capacity is an issue that has come up. Organizational capacity is one issue. So that's the main one that I can think of so far. But yeah, I think just conveying to them how we can work together in outreach, not only about climate, but about the work that the agency does and how additional folks can collaborate with our local partners to accomplish projects on the ground. That's another key theme of the outreach.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie.
Sure. Bruce.
Hey, Stephanie. I think this sounds like wonderful work and a lot of work. There's one issue that maybe we should consider, that a lot of work that has been done and has been published is coming from federal agencies rather than state. Mm-hmm. We have representatives like Corey and Dan, certainly U.S. Fish and Wildlife's doing that webinar. So we have Paul, we've got Eric from NOAA, which has reams of work and work with partners. They do have program partners, at least Fish and Wildlife. I think Corey's group does, and I know an EPA certainly does. So maybe we could do something reaching out internally to those board members who are representing the federal agencies, ask them just general questions on what they can do. It may not only be a source of information, but down the road, there's a possibility of having some joint funding of some of our projects.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Let's see, let's do Corey and then Jamie.
Just want to mention, we also have the Pacific Northwest Climate Hub, which is the USDA and it's NRCS, US Forest Service, and ARS, which the Agricultural Research Service. And so that is a great link, and that's the regional version of a national network. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of opportunities there, Bruce.
Thanks, Corey. Jamie?
Just quick comment and then also kind of a question. First of all, no surprise, great job that you've really thought this through in such depth, and really appreciate all the thought that's gone into this. And so, yes, Jesse, you did answer some of the questions I was going to have before. The one thing that does come to mind in terms of the public meetings and the thought that Eco Northwest is going to do some of that strategic outreach makes a tremendous amount of sense for all the reasons you mentioned. I'm wondering if the feedback they're receiving will be reflected in those public hearings, because if the public hearings is just hearing from our existing and traditional partners, often if there's change, there can be, there's going to be some, there may be some challenges that people face. And so I would just want to make sure that our public discussion reflects both those challenges and the opportunities, so those voices aren't heard. So I think the outreach to those groups, the different groups, is great. But I would just hope that maybe Eco Northwest could join those conversations to bring those reflections in and other opportunities so that people are hearing that as well.
That's great feedback, Jamie. Thank you. So kind of how do you incorporate the feedback that we receive from non-traditional partners into the public meetings that we have? Is there a way to summarize or relay some of that feedback, so there's more of an ongoing conversation? Okay. All right, I'm just looking to see if anybody else has got a hand up here. Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for the feedback. I don't think I'm missing anybody, but please pipe up if I am missing you. So we're going to transition next to a summary of the responses to climate questions in the fall 2021 grant applications with Jesse and Audrey.
Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, just give me one moment to share my screen. I've had some PowerPoint technical difficulties, so we're shifting to PDF. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see it? Or, yep. Okay, great. So Audrey and I are going to present an overview of the responses to the climate questions that we asked in our fall 2021 grant applications. So she and I are going to be tag teaming the presentation, so I'm going to turn it over to her first. Let's see, Audrey, if I can figure out how to do this. And whoops, there we go. Okay.
All right, thanks. And Jesse, can you hear me okay? Okay, thanks.
Yes.
So first,
sound
just a little bit of background about the climate questions. A subset of OWEB board members, as you know, had convened a climate subcommittee back in 2020, and really motivated by increasing data and concern about the climate crisis, the climate subcommittee proposed to add a suite of questions to OWEB grant applications. And also that same year, Governor Brown's Executive Order 20-04 was issued that included OWEB along with several other agencies calling for climate considerations to be incorporated throughout agency activities. So the intent of adding the suite of informational questions to selected OWEB grant applications was to gather more information from potential OWEB grantees at that project planning stage so that OWEB can learn alongside local conservation partners, really kind of following that current agency strategic plan and that spirit of bringing collaboration into all aspects of our work. Staff worked with the grant program managers within OWEB and externally with the ODA Noxious Weeds program to develop the questions, and also obtained review from several external partners to ensure that the climate questions were reasonable, clear, and would provide useful information. So in fall 2021, the questions were added to open solicitation, restoration, and technical assistance grants, as well as ODA's Noxious Weed Grant Program that is administered through OWEB's grant making system. Staff also coordinated with the Focused Investment Partnership Program to add climate questions to the FIP project level applications, and also to align with the higher level climate questions that were included in the FIP initiative application. Next slide. The climate questions added to the grant applications at OWEB are organized into 4 major components that Jesse and I will walk through today. The first component asks for information to help us better understand how the applicant envisions climate impacting the watershed, and really specifically the water and the habitat variables that are the focus of their proposed project. And then the next question asks whether and how project planning or design was modified to account for those anticipated climate impacts. And then there is a subset of questions included with restoration, and will also be included with acquisitions applications to understand the really specific adaptation, mitigation, and sequestration benefits that the applicants anticipate resulting from the proposed project activities, and also give an opportunity for applicants to provide more specific examples of these broad categories of benefits, with the goal of really helping OWEB and partners begin to more specifically describe the climate benefits of our collective efforts. And then the last section, last component, OWEB was really interested in learning about what constraints the applicant faced to incorporate climate considerations into their project planning. And next, thank you, a climate-related technical resources document was developed and provided online to help the applicants answer and respond to these new climate questions, and also to assist with just finding background information relevant to natural resources in Oregon. The climate-related technical resources document kind of compiles peer-reviewed information on climate impacts in our state. It's organized following the categories in the state's climate change adaptation framework. And it provides some links to online information and description for several online planning tools that are searchable by location and by landscape type. And these resources are intended to really just be a starting point. The goal is to update the document in the future to meet applicant needs based on what we hear through their responses, and to incorporate certainly new and updated information. And the climate-related technical resources document is available on OWEB's website, along with other field and technical guides. The link is shown here on the slide and was also included in the meeting materials sent out by Jesse for today's conversation. And next, I will turn back to Jesse to walk through information about the responses received and reviewed so far.
Thanks, Audrey. So as Audrey mentioned, I want to spend a bit of time walking through responses to these different questions. The responses that we are going to be sharing are primarily focused on the open solicitation grant applications, so for restoration and technical assistance. And where it's, in some cases, they were only questions that appeared, for example, in the restoration application. So I will try to note that when I talk about the findings on the different slides. And what we did is that Audrey and I read all of the responses from the grant applications, and we established 3 different bins. So in this case, it was, for example, the response demonstrates a good understanding of climate changes and impacts that are likely to occur for their project or habitats and species of concern. We then went back through and read each of the responses and then assigned them to a bin, and then we compared our rankings of the different applications. So the purpose of us doing this review and just trying to get a sense of applicants' understanding is really just to get a better idea of the technical assistance that applicants may need going forward. So where are people at, and where are we seeing maybe some gaps that technical assistance is going to be needed to help fill? So for this first question, Audrey kind of mentioned it earlier, but the question that we asked them was to describe your understanding of how the characteristics and functions of the watershed where the proposed project will occur are anticipated to change due to climate in the future. So we wanted them to describe how species, habitats, water quality is likely to change, given what climate changes are going to be impacting that particular place. So the kind of response we were looking for was something like, we're already seeing things like increased drought, altered flow regimes, and increased water temperatures. And when we look at the climate projections, these are likely to continue. So we're going to see extended periods of drought, increased frequency and intensity of atmospheric river events leading to increased flooding. And then we wanted them to then link those changes to particular impacts. So for example, these changes are likely to impact stream habitat availability and connectivity by reducing or eliminating stream flow, and then warmer water temperatures may affect the movement or survival of different fish species, for example. So really looking for what are the climate changes that are important, and then how does that impact your project or the species or habitats that you care about within that project. And so what we saw is that most applicants demonstrated a good to excellent understanding of the relevant climate changes and impacts. In some cases, we would see where they identified some of the relevant climate changes, but not all. They would miss some others. And what we also saw is that we would, applicants would identify the relevant climate changes, but not necessarily link those to the impacts. So they wouldn't go so far as to say increased drought means X, Y, or Z for my particular habitat or species or project. And it's not presented here, but we are seeing similar trends in the focused investment partnership review as well, where we're seeing maybe climate changes being identified, but not necessarily that link to the impacts. So the second question that we asked was around accounting for impacts. We used the same methodology as I talked about earlier, where we read the responses and assigned them to bins. This particular question was, how have you accounted for these climate impacts in your project planning, design, or implementation? So what we're looking for is something like, for a watershed improvement project, our project includes removing barriers to fish passage, which helps to increase stream habitat connectivity and allows fish access to areas that may be cooler. And then we've now added a new project activity once we looked at climate impacts, where we're going to be removing invasive plants that are outcompeting native species for water. And the hope is that if we're going to see increased drought conditions, we're giving as much water available to native species and habitat as possible. And so what we saw is that most applicants did account for impacts in some way. So we might see something like where they say we're doing this and it's going to help accomplish this. But what we really saw is that applicants focused on describing how their project generally improves resilience to climate change. So really more of that focus on what the benefits are of their project, not necessarily how they've looked at climate and then accounted for those impacts in the way that they're designing their project. And we also saw several that acknowledged no design changes as a result of anticipated climate changes and impacts, and that's fine. I have seen that in past work. The point of this is really to say, here are the impacts. What we're doing is going to continue to be viable given these impacts, so we don't see that we need to do any changes at this point. For those that did incorporate or account for the impacts, what we tended to see is the most frequent modifications were around altered infrastructure design, so changing the design of bridges or roads or culverts to account for those impacts. As well as thinking about what species to be planted. So for example, planting drought-resistant or drought-tolerant species. And then we also saw that some project design modifications might address one climate factor, but are maybe missing others. And as Audrey mentioned, we asked about carbon sequestration benefits, and then we also asked about adaptation benefits, which I'll present next. I'm going to go through these slides, these next two, fairly quickly because they're just really a frequency analysis. So this is where we asked for project activities that avoid natural habitat conversion or increase plant biomass. These can help to contribute to sequestration benefits. So select the habitats that you're potentially increasing these sequestration benefits. And what you can see is that riparian was the most frequently identified habitat where you're having those sequestration benefits. For adaptation benefits, there's a wider spread and you start to see different benefits being identified. So this was just asking applicants to select any climate adaptation benefits that may be provided by their project. And what you can see is that things like water temperature mitigation, wetland and floodplain reconnection, wildfire risk reduction, and wildlife habitat connectivity were some of the more frequently identified adaptation benefits by our applicants. So now I want to do kind of a funny exercise, I guess I would say, where I'm trying to link our responses to nature-based solutions. We've talked about that term a lot. It's come up in previous climate committee meetings, and we've shared some materials around nature-based solutions. So what I'm trying to do here is really put our grant applications in the context of nature-based solutions. So just as a reminder, nature-based solutions help to protect and restore habitats while at the same time storing carbon or avoiding emissions, and also providing co-benefits. So things like flood regulation or nutrient cycling. So I'm going to present a table next that is pretty dense, but I'm going to walk you through it in a stepwise fashion just to get you oriented. So on the far left-hand column here are some examples of nature-based solutions. And this table, because later on in the agenda today, we're going to be talking about the latest IPCC AR 6 Working Group 2 report on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. I wanted to also tie this to that discussion later. So within that report, they have a table where they call these ecosystem-based adaptation, which is a type of nature, it's like a component of nature-based solutions. So I modified that table and bin them into some that really apply to the projects that we received within the latest round of grant applications. So what you can see, some examples of nature-based solutions are things like restoring natural river courses or removing barriers, restoring and protecting wetlands and riparian habitat, shading rivers and streams, vegetation management for fire risk reduction, invasive wetland and riparian plant control, woody plant control and open grassland ecosystems, and then rangeland rehabilitation, which encompasses a lot of different kinds of actions. And I really love this table in the report, and I think it's a great thing to do, which is to link these different solutions to the climate impact that's addressed by those different solutions. So what you can see is things like restoring natural river courses helps to address impacts related to increased rainfall intensity or altered flow regimes, for example. Invasive wetland and riparian plant control helps to address changes related to increased drought. And then also there's a number of co-benefits that are provided as a result of these nature-based solutions. So for example, again, restoring natural river courses, restoring and protecting wetlands and riparian habitat, things like flood regulation and reduced flood damage, helps to retain sediment, and it helps to increase water security, both in terms of quality and supply. There's a whole host of co-benefits that can be realized by these different nature-based solutions. And what we saw, we have a number of our applications really fit into these nature-based solutions. So we received, I would say the vast majority of the applications that we received really fit into this first row on restoring natural river courses, although we saw a number of other applications around woody plant control and rangeland rehabilitation. So we see examples of project activities in those applications, things like large woody debris, beaver dam analogs, and floodplain restoration. We see things like forest health treatments and thinning that were proposed, juniper removal, planting native grassland species. And I bolded that floodplain restoration one because I wanted to mention that we did also receive applications that then mention we're going to be doing restoration, but now a component that we're adding to think more about climate adaptation is planting drought-resistant species as part of our planting mix within restoration. So you're also seeing some of that adaptation component being added into the application responses. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Audrey to talk about some of the constraints that were identified by applicants.
Thanks, Jessie. So that final fourth section of responses relates to a question about what constraints applicants are facing on their ability to incorporate climate considerations into project planning. And the question about constraints was included with all the grant types that had the climate questions added. Staff have explored some emerging themes from the responses to that question and provide a couple of examples as well. As you can see, many folks indicated a need for finer scale climate projection data and more specific recommendations based on that data to be made available for use at the project site level. So that need for site scaled information was really a top theme. Many applicants mentioned concern about just uncertainty and the unknowns when faced with planning for climate impacts. Several folks mentioned the need for a more quantifiable metric for climate resilience. That is along the lines of the example response shown here on the slide in the call out box. And applicants really highlighted some trade-offs that they're facing when incorporating climate considerations into project planning. Just a couple examples, folks might be considering using solar-powered chainsaws, but note, this may not even be feasible for all projects. It does not also always necessarily equate to a net carbon benefit in all situations. For example, when working in a very remote area or in a situation with a very tight timeline and limited contractor availability. In another example, an applicant needed to transport woody material to a project site. So they evaluated the difference between using a dump truck or a helicopter and saw overall really less emissions would result from using the dump truck, even though it was a more time-intensive approach. So those are just a couple examples of the types of trade-offs that applicants kind of described in response to this question. And folks mentioned just the capacity, the need for additional time to incorporate climate into project planning and design. And finally, we will touch upon the next steps. Thank you, including kind of collecting and reviewing responses from several open solicitation grant application types in the spring. So technical assistance and restoration, another kind of round of applications, and then looking at responses to the web monitoring grants, to the climate considerations from those grants as well. And OWEB also plans to collect responses to the climate questions with the next available grant cycles that will come out on partnership technical assistance, land acquisitions, and water acquisitions when these grant types are offered next through the online application system. And OWEB is looking forward to using the information from the responses to help inform topics to develop for further technical guidance and to inform conversations around the Rules Advisory Committee. My colleague Jesse and I would be happy to take any questions over this presentation.
Wow, thank you, Jesse and Audrey. That was really excellent, great information. Yeah, just fascinating to see how climate change is already being incorporated into to folks' project designs, and then what the needs still are out there. Just a couple of observations on what you presented, and some of the recommendations that we've received earlier in the committee meeting. Bruce made an excellent suggestion about asking our federal partners for resources that they might have. And it just made me think, as you were talking, our local partners do rely a lot on federal agencies for design standards and some of that technical foundation of the work that they do. And so I think understanding how the federal agencies are making modifications to their standard is going to be really helpful going forward. And so I think following up with NRCS, Forest Service, and others to understand how their designs are changing and how that connection with the work that grantees do is going to be really important. And then I think another observation in terms of, I think being able to package this information in a way that it's usable to our grantees. I think with the very busy implementer community that we work with, I think less is more, or just really thinking through how do we package and share this information in terms of training and clear and easy to understand resources is going to be really important going forward. So I don't know if any of our federal partners want to comment on any efforts that they have going on in that vein, and also want to make time for our any other committee members to provide comments. All right,
Stephanie, very briefly, I just wanted to echo, when we were reading the responses, I definitely did see a lot of reference to looking at federal and state design standards. Mm-hmm. So the more that we are aware of those and they get updated, and we let if our grantees or grant applicants aren't aware of it, they're really relying on those state and federal design standards and using that to inform what they're doing on the ground. So we need to be certainly kept up to speed on those changes as they're occurring.
Great, thanks, Jesse. Corey?
Yeah, so obviously we're very, NRCS and all of USD is very interested in this idea of being able to demonstrate impacts and metrics around the conservation work we're doing across all land uses and sectors. Right now, the best tool we have, which is mostly good on ag land, but not all ag land, is the COMET model. Mm-hmm. And I will say it's not necessarily helpful now, but hopefully you're aware of the $1 billion USDA climate commodities grant offering that's currently out there. And one of the emphasis of that grant is looking for innovation and creativity when it comes to answering some of these questions with little guidance, which is actually maybe a good thing. They're kind of throwing out there, like, show us what you've got, show us how you would do this. Like, and it's across multiple land uses, which I think we have right now, like a lot of work maybe in cropland systems because they're very defined, but then in restoration systems, it's a little bit harder to track some of this down. I mean, there's good stuff out there, but so I'm pretty hopeful that they will, a year from now or so, when we've got these big players with big dollars behind them, that we might see some different ways and some different tools come out of this infusion of resources. But we certainly have a growing library of tools that we can help people. And the Climate Hub that I put the link in the chat, it's got a great biochar tool. It's got the seed selection tool. So there are some things out there that you can start along with Comet to try and get to some of this. But it really is going to take, for a model like Comet to work, you have to have big sets of data and someone to either gather what's out there or someone to collect more information. And so we're working on it.
Great. And I know NRCS has done work in terms of supporting some of that research to build the data sets. And that's something that OWEB is currently funding as well at OSU.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm looking for other hands raised here. Any other feedback, questions that this generated for you regarding the grantees' responses that we should incorporate into the listening sessions? Oh, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think our incorporation of climate questions into grants is perhaps even behind where OWEB is right now. I mean, our prior administration didn't have a priority on this, and we're kind of ramping up and getting back in the game. Similar to what Corey mentioned, we have lots of resources and tools available on our website. There's one addressing climate change in the water sector, which might be particularly relevant. But I think, the work that OWEB is doing in kind of incorporating these questions into grant solicitations is something that we're currently doing. We have appropriations coming in, and we have infrastructure funds coming in, and so we are attempting to do similar things to what OWEB is doing now to pull that into our grant programs. And as you guys are finding, it's a challenge, right? Our grant recipients, it's a challenge to pull together a grant application, a grant proposal to begin with. EPA asks for a lot of information, and so on the one hand, this is sort of another layer of that, and there's challenges with just sort of pushing too much burden onto grant applicants that we're also trying to be careful with as we all sort of figure this stuff out moving forward. So I'd say we're in a pretty similar boat to where OWEB is right now.
Oh, thanks, Dan. That's really helpful. Brenda.
Yes, just a quick comment and then a question. So yeah, it is new, it is challenging. There will be challenges to grant writers, but it is what it is, and it's going to have to be done. And the more we can identify the support tools that will help them and get those easily available to them, then I think we should just continue to move forward. The question, though, I have is in the questions that you asked of the cooperators, did you ask anything specifically about how to reduce use of fossil fuels when conducting management activities?
I'll start, Audrey, and then you can jump in. So what we did ask, and we didn't present on here, is just we asked what if they were considering the use of other equipment, besides gas-powered machinery, for example. So we asked to, let's see, I'm not articulating this very well, Brenda, I apologize. But we did ask about equipment use and exactly what they were going to be using and whether or not they'd consider the use of alternative equipment. And what we mostly saw is that they would highlight different, using gas-powered hand equipment or gas-powered I don't know, ATVs or that kind of, I don't know what you call those, like mid machine size. And in some cases, applicants did respond and say, you know, we've looked at, in this case, we're going with a contractor who uses electric, hand equipment, or we looked at the trade-offs between, like Audrey mentioned, you know, the helicopter versus the dump truck and emissions. And so we asked some related to that, but not just generally, like how are you considering how to reduce emissions through your project activities? There wasn't something quite so broad as that.
Yeah, correct. I'll correct. I would just add the question that Jesse's referring to, where we kind of were able to begin to quantify some of those trade-offs. The question was phrased and was really coming from a place of help us understand the current situation. You know, check what types of equipment you're using now, and then what are you considering? So the intent of the question overall, and this one specifically, was first kind of look at what we've got right now, and then think about where we might want to go next.
All right.
And I will add, sorry, one more thing to add to that is just that we also saw a number of applicants that would say, like, we are using gas powered, but we're being very cognizant about using a local contractor. So we're not, like, distances being factored into it. So we're trying to reduce emissions because we're sourcing something locally. And so we saw that in a number of application responses.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, Corey, and then Bruce, and then I'm going to move us on to the next agenda item at about 10:05-ish. Corey,
Just really quick. So 10 years ago is when NRCS as an agency started this effort to help build awareness for soil health. And at that time, we didn't have the whole body when you think of what soil health is now, just the infrastructure around it and the science around it and the research and the tools. But we knew it was good and knew it was important. We knew it could do good things and it would work. And I feel like where this is, like asking these questions and starting down this path, is exactly where NRCS was 10 years ago. And I can't believe I'm like 10 years in, I've been through the whole thing. And I can say, we ended up in a good place and we're still going to a good place. And now we're taking soil health into the climate conversation, and it's all there for climate because we have the 10 years of working with it. So I think let's, like Brenda said, don't be shy from going in there, not knowing everything and not having the perfect tool, because we know that there's these co-benefits. Just because we can't explain it perfectly and we don't have the exact data to say it, doesn't mean we don't know that it's going to be a good thing and that we're going to make an impact. So I just wanted to say that from the experience of soil health to where we are now, like, keep going.
Thanks, Corey. Bruce, and then Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Corey, for that. That was great. As I looked at the questions and the responses, I'm stepping back. It looked to me like there were the people who were asked to fill out the questionnaire actually would have a couple overriding questions of their own. And the first one would be, is OWEB going to do anything that will lessen my chance to be funded? And the corollary to that is, OWEB going to do anything that will improve my chances to be funded in this endeavor? And I think that colors a lot of the I don't know how we get to that, how we can be reassuring to the extent that we will be looking at additional information. But some of these questions, I think I think we want to do our questions in a way that brings people along, like Corey said, rather than instills any kind of fear by our question itself. So anyway, I think we're doing the right thing and we're going forward, and hopefully we get where Corey is with 10 years and maybe even a little quicker.
Thanks, Bruce. Gary?
Gary Marshall. And you're right, Bruce, we are going in the right direction. I just, that's the comment I have is that it's great to see us, taking these steps at this pace. I mean, we're moving along well here. We're, the applicants are going to be thinking in a different way that they have in the past. When they put these practices together, but not at first. It's going to be some rough water, but they're going to be considering the whole climate issue in this, and that's I think that's what we want. Corey, I appreciate your comments on the the plants and the soil and soil health. I mean, that's what I do. That's one of my main passions. I go out here in the field and I see how the plants are doing, and where I live, things are definitely under stress. We see these areas that have been meadows or native meadows, irrigated areas that are right now, when the wind blows, I can see the dirt moving off of them. And so, I appreciate that NRCS took this, long range view of it 10 years ago and has the data and the information put together, because these natural areas are and the practices we put in are going to make the difference and make a big difference, I think, in the whole climate issue. So thank you for that. That's it.
Thank you, Gary. All right. We're going to move on to the next agenda item. Thanks everybody for the presentation and discussion. So next we've got Eric Hartstein with a legislative update. And just from the perspective of a newbie who has been in a previous role through several short sessions, I think generally short sessions can be a quieter time for agencies because there isn't the budgeting process and the agency submitted bills, but this session was pretty unusual in terms of the work for the agency and just the level of engagement. And we did a lot of advanced prep work in anticipation of some of the questions that we might get and about resources possibly coming to OWEB. So I really want to commend our staff and managers for all the work that they did to be prepared. At the same time, a lot of work came in associated with the session that even as prepared as we were spent a lot of time engaging in and making sure that we got the resources that we need to be able to effectively administer the allocations that we received in the short session. So, and a lot of the folks who are working on rolling out some of the new programs that we got in the short session were also involved, the programs we got in the special session were also involved in making sure we got the resources that we needed to implement the programs that we received in the short session. So we're really excited about what we received, but just got a lot ahead of us in terms of rollout. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So yeah, it was definitely an eventful legislative session. Starting with the budget, the end of session budget bill that passed contains over $20 million for OWEB. So the funding includes lottery dollars to establish the limited duration conservation outcome specialist position that was reduced during the lottery revenue shortfall associated with COVID. There was general funds to establish a limited duration position and extend an existing position to support the administration of OWEB's drought relief programs that were created in the December 2021 special legislative session that I think Stephanie will update here in a little bit. There was $5.2 million of general funds to create a 2021 wildfire recovery grant program, which will be modeled on OWEB's existing 2020 wildfire recovery program. 5 million of that will be for grants and the remainder for program administration. And that also includes the establishment of one limited duration position. There was $5 million in the bill of general funds for the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program. So this is the first time that this Working Lands grant program has been funded, and the legislation also includes authorization to establish 3 limited duration positions to help administer the program. And finally, there in the budget bill was $10 million in general funds to add to OWEB's existing water acquisitions grant program. So along with that is authorization to establish limited duration position and extension of service on a second limited duration position to provide program administration. On the policy bill front, for the purposes of this committee, I'll just note that Senate Bill 1534 did not pass, and this was the bill that would have declared it a state policy to advance carbon sequestration strategies in natural and working lands. And it also included other provisions like developing a carbon sequestration inventory and baseline, as well as developing metrics on how well natural and working lands are sequestering and storing carbon. A bill that did pass, which kind of gets to that intersection of potentially climate, water, and DEI that was talked about a little earlier, is House Bill 4077, which is related to environmental justice. This bill adds OWEB as a natural resource agency to the environmental justice statutes and outlines the responsibilities of a newly formed environmental justice council. So among the duties of the council would be to develop an environmental justice mapping tool, and on the request of natural resource agencies to provide some consultation and review of the agency's proposed policies and administrative rules as they pertain to environmental justice. So this will undoubtedly be really beneficial to OWEB, but I will just state it will take some time for the council to be assembled, as well as that mapping tool developed. So with that, I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
Meg.
Thank you, Stephanie and Eric, both. I had a question about the general funds generally, and particularly focused on the water acquisition with this question. Do these funds have to be expended within a certain time frame? Or can they roll over?
Thanks, Meg. So these funds were going into our flexible incentives spending account, which I think then turns them into other funds that do not need to be carried forward at the end of the biennium. So they are able to be rolled forward.
Oh, they are able to be. Oh, good. Okay. So with respect to the water acquisition, I didn't go back and look, and you guys may not have this off the top of your head, but 10 million, how does that compare to our typical spending plan amount for water acquisition for a biennium? Do you have any sense of that? It seems like a lot, but I didn't go back and look to see how big a deal that is, basically, is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, it's quite a bit more, Meg. Okay. I think since the program inception, and Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're at about $2 million in water acquisitions since the program
Since the inception.
Wow. Is that right, Jesse?
5 million since inception, about 2 since 2016.
Okay.
About 2 of that since 2016. So
does that warrant some kind of further strategic planning for that program? Or would it just kind of roll into normal water acquisition activity?
So I can take that, Meg. So we are working, we're figuring that out right now. We had Eric Williams and I had a conversation with the folks who were advocates for this particular funding, so Wild Salmon Center and Trout Unlimited, just to get a sense of what folks are thinking in terms of timeline and where these funds, if there's projects that people have in mind already in terms of water acquisition. And so we, right now we're still figuring out timeline and how to roll this out. But I think what we're hearing is that at least in the short term, offering not the full 10 million, because there may not be enough projects that are ready in terms of, water acquisition ready projects at this point. Looking at a smaller offering to start, and then larger offerings in a year or more, once some of our partners have had a chance to get some of those larger projects figured out and ready to submit. So yes, it does warrant a little bit of strategic thinking. Yeah.
All right.
Just one comment there too. I think one thing we've heard is that there might be capacity needs in some areas of the state where flow restoration is a priority. And so it probably will take some time to develop projects in some of those regions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Great. And one other note while we're on this, and I can probably just cover implementation of or prioritization of these new programs we received, as well as the drought program rollout together in one package, skipping, and then we'll come back to one of our agenda items in a second. But so obviously these are a lot of new programs on top of new programs that we are already working to roll out. And so in terms of prioritizing the hiring that we do and the rollout of these programs, we are really prioritizing the hiring of the drought and the fire staff, just because those are our emergencies. And the funding that we received in the December short session, as well as the post-fire recovery funding from the February session, is intended to be emergency relief and building resiliency for future emergencies to come, which we are certainly facing some of those in the state this year with drought. And so we are close. We're close to hiring on a couple of the drought positions, and then we have hired folks for 2 of the drought positions. For the 2 folks that we've hired, we've got one administrative person starting March 21st, and then we've got a drought programs coordinator starting April 8th. So just really, again, want to thank the OWEB managers and staff for pulling together, getting those position descriptions developed, and standing up the hiring process as quickly as they did, while also managing the ongoing fire recovery grants program that we received in the 2021 long session. We did a lot of scoping to inform the drought programs. OWEB leadership and staff met with 41 different either individuals or groups, and those included agency, tribe, and stakeholder representatives, particularly concentrating in Jefferson and Klamath counties, as well as statewide organizations and agencies that work with those counties and the tribes located in those counties, just to really inform the program guidelines and designs. And we're continuing to meet regularly with key agency and local partners. Currently, we're drafting guidance for the Jefferson County soil stewardship and the Klamath livestock watering allocations. We really wanted to prioritize those 2 pots of funding among the drought programs that we received. We're working on the guidance for those. And then once our drought staff they'll begin building the applications for those programs. So that's just a little bit of prioritization on the hiring. So beyond the drought and fire positions that we've put first in terms of bringing on, then we will also have hiring with regard to the Ag Heritage Program, the Water Acquisitions Program, and then we received a conservation outcomes specialist position in our budget, as well as a limited duration position that we'll be hiring for. So just to give you a sense of the order of priority there. I think there is interest among folks that we stand up all these programs as soon as possible, but we are really trying to be thoughtful and pace ourselves in terms of how we roll them out, and doing all of the work well in terms of that rollout. All right. And I'm going to go back now to Jesse for a quick update on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. And oh, I'm sorry, I see we've got a couple questions. Before I do that, I'll do Jamie and then Gary.
Actually, Gary had his hand up first, so I'll defer to Gary.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. Gary Marshall, you just kind of doubling back to Meg's questions along the line of the water acquisitions. I was, when we got that from Lisa, I was kind of surprised at that amount, not remembering exactly what we had in our budgeted from before. But can somebody remind me of just what we expended on this last cycle for water acquisition? Because my recollection is that we spent about half of what we actually had budgeted for that. Is that correct?
We haven't offered water acquisitions. It's been because of COVID, we pretty much stopped doing that grant offering. So I don't believe it's been offered for the last at least a year, if not 2 years. And I don't know if anybody else, if Eric or Stephanie know more, but so nothing. Gary, to answer your question, we haven't spent anything on water acquisitions. At least 2020, 2021.
Yeah, maybe I'm remembering the previous cycle, but I just remembered it as coming in well under the budgeted figure. So it was interesting to me that piece of money came specifically for that item. So. In our conversations with the stakeholders and partners who are working on this funding, what we heard is really, and this is an important point, which is that they're looking at this as a drought resiliency tool. Like we are going to need more tools in our toolbox to deal with drought because it's just going to keep happening. And this funding more water acquisitions is another tool for us to help improve drought resiliency. And so looking at it more as like a long-term investment and a larger investment, because drought is just occurring more and more and it's getting worse. So. Okay, thank you.
And
All right.
my question was just kind of combining the legislative update and the drought program update, and really tied off of what Jesse was just saying. Just wanted to ask, and this may be a longer conversation, about the challenges of limited duration staff, given these are long-term challenges. And then also, I don't know if there were discussions in the legislature about whether long-term, whether these positions may be continued, and whether these responsibilities will stay with OWEB or potentially go to other agencies within the state, because per Jesse's comment, these are going to be long-term challenges.
Thank you, Jamie, for that question. As we try to hire for limited duration positions right now, and I think I can probably speak for multiple natural resource agencies that we are all trying to hire from the same pool of people or retain from the same pool of people. And it can create a little bit of a musical chairs situation without getting into the weeds of how all of that works. So it is challenging. We're very excited about the 2 staff that we've been able to hire. They are really outstanding. So very pleased about that. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed on the other 2, but it is challenging. And as you can imagine, if we're trying to provide opportunities for folks elsewhere in state government, folks could be facing leaving a permanent position for a limited duration position, and that can be difficult. Regarding extending the program beyond the biennium, I would just say continuity of our programs, as well as making sure we have the agency structure to really be able to handle the diverse portfolio that's been assigned our way, is a real priority for the agency going into budget for 23 to 25. And with that, I'm looking at the time here and wanted to make sure that we provide a public comment opportunity before we adjourn for our member of the public who is on. I think that, Kaylin, you indicated you may or may not end up wishing to provide comment depending on some of the updates that you heard. So I'm just going to do a quick call for public comment. And then if time allows, we'll circle back to the IPCC item before we adjourn.
Hi, this is Kaylin Barter. I'll keep it incredibly brief. I am here with Wild Salmon Center and was encouraged to hear Jesse's comment earlier. Really just here to honestly to cheerlead OWEB and this committee. I'm serve alongside Commissioner Reeves on the Regional Water Planning and Management Work Group. And I think that that's an outstanding linkage that this committee has to that work. I also am thrilled to hear the description of this water acquisition program funding as a yes and approach. Commissioner Reeves asked, is this going to need a level of strategic planning or is it kind of a continuation of the water acquisition program as usual? And in order to get these much needed funds on the ground as quickly as possible, I love that it's a yes and, you know, let's keep the solicitation going as planned for later this summer. Get some of these dollars out to partners on the ground in time for the 2023 irrigation season. Last thing I'll mention is that the issue of capacity on the ground is real. These water deals are incredibly difficult to assemble and can take years actually of local engagement and technical knowledge. I was really encouraged to hear the discussion around supporting those capacity for those groups on the ground. With that, I really just am so happy to hear all of the good work coming out of this committee meeting today. I do think that the drought resilience is going to be just a huge part of this work going forward. So with that, I will pass it back. Thank you so much for the opportunity today.
Thanks, Kaylin. Great. So with the last few minutes we have, I just wanted to touch briefly on the summary of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Assessment Report. Jesse sent that out, I think, with a batch of committee materials to all of you. Pretty sobering information in there, as I'm sure that you saw about the outlook. But I think a couple of highlights that really stood out to me were and that was flagged in the summary are the connection with nature-based solutions. You saw Jesse's crosswalk of nature-based solutions with the work that our grantees are already doing today. And then just a note that much of the adaptation work that has already been done has taken place around water. And I think that's something that OWEB can be proud to have supported over the last couple of decades. But yeah, I really appreciated the strong connection with nature-based solutions going forward that was highlighted in the report. Any comments from board or committee members before we wrap up for the day? All right, I'm scrolling back and forth a couple of times. Seeing none, again, thank you, Jamie and Bruce, for being willing to serve as co-chairs. We'll work with you on the planning and prep for the next meeting going forward, and appreciate all the conversation today.
Great job today, Stephanie. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.